Do you ever feel like you're not enough? Maybe you look at yourself compared to someone else and you feel as though you don't measure up. Let's get honest here. Who here has had struggles with wondering if you have anything to offer the world around you? This type of mindset and thinking comes from all of us being human. We are susceptible to thinking this way. As humans, we all have insecurities. Let me assure you, even the toughest person in this room has insecurities. These insecurities lead us to a place where we feel like we aren't quite enough. Sometimes we think, if I had just had this or that, I'd be enough. We think, if I had just come from this family or that family, I would be a better me. We think, if I were just a little bit better at this or that over there, I'd finally make it. And the thing is, with some of those statements, you might be right. Sometimes the difference between achieving your goals and falling short really is just being a little bit better in certain areas. That's just true. Someone who comes from a really great, supportive, loving family has an easier pathway to being a solid, well-rounded person than someone who was raised by raccoons. Like, that's true. But with these kinds of thoughts about how we're not enough, when they won't run on repeat in the back of our minds for long enough, it can really start to hurt us and wreak havoc on our sense of identity and purpose. You don't want "you're not good enough" to be the soundtrack of your life. The reality is, there's a natural gap that everyone has to fill. Nobody is perfect at everything. And some people are just naturally better at certain things than others. And when we see those moments of success or failure in sports or academics or even relationships through an unhealthy lens, we usually tend to bring that perspective into our relationship with God as well. You want to experience big moments with God, but it feels like first you have to be just a little bit better about not sinning as much. You want to experience big moments with God, but it feels impossible to feel His presence at home because your home life is so negative. You want to experience big moments with God, but it feels like you're just not enough. Soundtrack of your life. We've got to find a way to skip to a better song. Hopefully we can in our last week of this series, Moments. Okay, you might think that something fishy is going on, but I assure you there's not. I say this because yet again, we are in the book of John. John's gospel account is so fascinating and filled with so many stories of the life-changing power of Jesus as He was here on earth. Today, we're in John chapter 6, verse 1. It says this: "Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is, the Sea of Tiberias. And a great crowd of people followed Him because they saw the signs He had performed by healing the sick." Chapter 6 kicks off with a bang as Jesus and His disciples are being followed by a great number of people. With good reason. Jesus had been healing sick people left and right and really had gained popularity in the area. People wanted to be near Jesus. People wanted to see what He would do. People wanted to be healed. When Jesus looked up, verse 5 says this: "When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming towards Him, He said to Philip, 'Where shall we buy bread for all of these people to eat?' He asked this only to test them, for He already had in mind what He was going to do. Verse 7, Philip answered Him, "It would take more than a half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have just a bite." This particular occasion, Jesus has a plan in mind, but He wants to hear the disciples' response to what they might want to do. He asked them to feed all the people. Now, let's pause here. I think it's so important to know that Jesus was already thinking about how He'd feed all the people coming towards Him. This gives us hope. This should give you and I hope and trust in Jesus. He's always thinking about our best interests. Let's look at verse 8. Another one of His disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will that go among so many?" Verse 10, Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. Verse 12, when they had all had enough to eat, He said to His disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted." Verse 13, so they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. One disciple finds a boy in the crowd and shows Jesus what little the boy has. Jesus takes the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he blesses it and gives thanks and begins to feed 5,000 people. That's just the men. In those days, they typically didn't count the number of women and children. So scholars say that it could have been 15 to 20,000 people in all. Not only were they able to feed everyone, but they had leftovers. What a miracle. Jesus yet again shows his miraculous power. Let's reread verse 9. Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many? I want to take a brief look at this story from the perspective of the little boy. We're never told his name. We're never told his backstory. We just know that he is in the crowd. Can you imagine being him in this moment, like attending in the crowd because perhaps his mom and dad wanted to hear Jesus? Perhaps they wanted Jesus to heal them in some way. They bring their son because, of course, he can't stay home alone. And the boy grabs a little something for them to have lunch later. Somewhere along the way, a man comes up to him and asks to take him and his lunch to the front to where Jesus is. He sees Jesus in person for perhaps the first time and gives the little that he has. Then boom, right in front of his eyes, he sees his lunch he grabbed on the way out start to make its way around to all of the people. Now, can you imagine what that moment with Jesus did for this kid? Thinking he could possibly never have enough for all of those people turns into way more than enough? No way. No doubt this miracle marked the rest of his life. He would be able to tell his children and grandchildren forever that he was a part of an astounding miracle of Jesus. All he had to do was give what he had, and it became enough. So what about you? What in your life seems like it's not enough, so small, so insignificant? It could be the talents that you have. It could be the very normal family situation you have. It could be that you examine your life and think nothing special could ever happen to someone like you. Maybe you've faced tremendous loss or hard times and you feel like if you had more, you'd be enough. God sees, knows, and understands you. He can work with whatever you have or don't have. That's what this story of Jesus and the boy with the fish and the loaves shows us. But can I remind us that this is also at the core of the message of the gospel itself? We have absolutely no ability to save ourselves from our sin and rebellion. We can't acquire enough skills or work hard enough to earn right relationship with God or adoption as his children. The message of the gospel is that we give what little we have, our faith in Jesus and repentance from sin. And Jesus not only fills in the gaps, but actually clothes us in his perfection and righteousness so we can be right with God again. So it's silly for us to think that in any area of our relationship with Jesus, we can't succeed because we aren't enough. We have never been enough in and of ourselves. That's why we need Jesus. So here's the point. When you give what you have, a miracle can happen. Allow me to encourage you one last time. When you give what you have, a miracle can happen. Jesus, in a very real sense, was a walking possibility. What I mean by that is that anything was possible when Jesus was on the scene. These past few weeks, we've seen just a few of the things he was able to do. Nothing was and is impossible for him. People experience life-changing key moments with him. We can too. The key to key moments is inviting him into our lives, and that's literally it. When we give him all we have, he takes over and can make a miracle happen.